Multiple versions of Venom are all about to converge in a clash with Spider-Man that is going to change the future of the Venom symbiote forever. So as we get into this comic, we are taken to Philadelphia about a week ago, and we see a symbiote swinging around the city. This one is trying to help people and is a female host. And we see her as she gets down to the ground, tries to stop a van. Unfortunately, she is shot and we don't know the whereabouts and if she in fact survived, but we see that the symbiote she was wearing is pretty bad off, trying to crawl for its life. Over at the Guggenheim Museum, no really, it's the Guggenheim Museum, like Mark Guggenheim, the guy from the CW, we see that the Leaper is inside of this museum trying to steal some stuff. Fortunately enough, our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man just so happens to be here and is quick to stop him and his compadre. Do people still call their associates compadres? I don't know. Anyways, Spider-Man wins, but then Black Cat shows up and she means no good as she almost destroys a priceless bone artifact. Knowing that Peter's going to try to stop it, this is the distraction she needs to be able to get away with what she needs. We then catch up with Flash Thompson, who of course is missing the Venom symbiote still. And we see him and Peter get together and he tells him about his friend Mania, who actually ended up losing the symbiote. It was her at the beginning and he's very worried about her, but he's also worried about what's happening with the Venom symbiote, and he wants Peter to hopefully help him track down where the symbiote is. Well, he wants Peter's help contacting Spider-Man to have Spider-Man help him. As the story keeps going, we actually catch up with Eddie Brock, who is also doing a little bit of a beating of his own, but he starts to lose control again, so there's only one thing and one place he can do and go. He goes to Alchemax, where of course he needs a little bit more of a cure. Now at the same time he was being followed by Flash, who ends up getting inside, and the two are finally going to start going at each other. But we see that Spidey was actually tracking Flash because he didn't trust him and he knew he was going to go after the symbiote despite his warnings. So as he gets inside, he sees that the symbiote is actually being torn apart. It can't decide if it wants to go back to Flash, who made it a hero, or if it wants to stick with Eddie, who lets it just go insane and evil. So Spidey's caught in the middle of this and this battle that's happening between the symbiotes, and he decides that he's going to take this, you could say, I guess, serum that can almost kill a symbiote if it so tries, and also it's what's used to subdue it, while Eddie wears it and spills it on him, revealing us to anti-venom, Agent Venom. And he looks very cool, very unique, very stylized, something that definitely sticks out. And by the end of the comic, we see that a bunch of people at a bar have all been turned into symbiotes that are all going to be going on the attack. He does manage to actually rip the Venom symbiote off of him. Unfortunately, the material that Agent Anti-Venom is made out of is actually very hurtful to Venom. So when he rips the suit apart, he actually ends up killing about 90% of it, and only a small piece actually still remains. Eddie Brock continues to try to fight for it, but he's webbed up by Spider-Man. And while he's doing that, Agent Venom actually ends up swinging away. Spidey catches up to him and says, "Listen, I know exactly where we can go, so let's go there." On the other side of that, we catch up at the Black Cat Club, which of course is her dealing with the bunch of nobodies that are still running through New York that she's in command of, and she's not very happy with their progress report. Unfortunately, things are going to get a lot worse, as Lee actually ends up showing up, and Price doesn't want anything but to kind of fight her and take everything over. So a fight is going to break out. As that's going on back with Spider-Man, we see that he's actually brought Agent Venom over to his apartment. Of course, Flash doesn't know that this is Peter Parker, that is Spider-Man, so he says, you know, I'm friends with Peter, he's told me I can use some of the scientific stuff in here, so let's do that, and let's figure out what this suit is made out of. So essentially, while this is going on, they're just going through it, and Peter tells him, look, I need a piece of that suit. Not your suit, like the Venom suit. I need a piece of that because I have to study it, because this could be the only chance we can actually find to be able to stop it. And in the meantime, he actually builds a Venom tracer, something that can trace symbiotes by using a small sample of it. And while all that was going on, things aren't going much better in the Black Cat Club. Literally, it is an all-out brawl. The who's who's of all of these losers are fighting one another. Hammerhead gets converted into a Venom symbiote. But it's not just him. Plenty more actually end up succumbing to Price's own attack. So as we keep seeing this, we actually see that Spider-Man and Flash have finally showed up. They've traced exactly where they're being led to, which happens to be Black Cat's club. And when they get inside, Felicia Hardy, along with the rest of her crew, have all been converted. And they're ready for a massive fight. We see that Eddie Brock is being tormented, specifically this time by his mind. As he's sitting on a bench at the local New York park, we see that a dog keeps barking at him. He's really trying to take all of his patience and willpower just not to punch the dog, while he's constantly berating himself with a bunch of personal insults just because he lost the symbiote. Over with Spidey and Flash Thompson, things aren't exactly going any better. As we see from the last 2 issues, Lee has converted quite a lot of the foes over the years that Spider-Man has faced all into venomized versions, which are all under his command, and unfortunately one of these happens to be Felicia Hardy, the Black Cat, who isn't necessarily taking commands from Price for some reason or another. And speaking of commands, when the comic transitions over to catch up with the symbiote sample that Peter Parker left in Morris's apartment, we see that it's trying to find a way out. And it does by going into the sewer drains, by way of dumping itself down a sink. Back with the fight that's going on, we see that Black Cat is finally sent in, and she does actually attack. She goes right after Flash Thompson, and it's because she realized what she has to do is sort of resist, but also somewhat give in to the temptation of the symbiote. She goes in for a kiss, and due to the power that the anti-venom spider suit has, she's able to revert back. Lee isn't going to have any of this, so he sets all of the symbiotes up upon them to try to stop them quickly. Black Cat is going to do what she does best and try to take care of herself, leaping out the window. Whereas luck would have it, she ends up bumping right into Eddie Brock, who has been wandering the streets in search of his Venom symbiote. Lucky for him, the symbiote, finding its way out of the sewer, is able to get onto him, and now once again he is one with the Venom suit. But thanks to Black Cat ditching the duo that were fighting Lee, things aren't exactly going good for them, because Flash Thompson and Peter Parker have been hung upside down in a bunch of chains as Lee looks on, trying to decide what to do with them. It is at this moment that Peter Parker tells Flash that he's really proud of all the good things he's done with the suit. Unfortunately, the timing is rather bad. So as we left off in the last issue, we saw that Spider-Man was now under the control of Maniac, aka Lee, who of course now is taking pieces of his symbiote and spreading it around to be able to control a large part of the New York underworld crime. As we get into this comic, we see Spidey is in full-on bad guy effect, as he's actually robbing a truck full of supplies and leaving the bad guys out here. Over with our, I guess, villain of the story, Lee, we see that he has Agent Anti-Venom tied to a conveyor belt, and he's going to literally melt everything off of him and put Flash Thompson out of the living world, along with his symbiote. Unfortunately, this plan is foiled by Mania, who we first saw that she actually lost her symbiote, and that's the one that Lee took. She's here right at the perfect time. She comes jumping down, beating up the bad guys, able to save Flash from certain death. As the comic keeps going, we see that Venom is actually back at Alchemax, and this time he comes along with Black Cat. They're here for a very particular reason. Over on the other side of that, we catch up with Spider-Man, who's talking to Lee, and he's getting a little mouthy, but everything's kind of going okay. As it turns out, they've been trying to get the attention of the Black Cat and draw her out. So Spider-Man has actually been hitting all of her convoys and stealing all of her supplies, which the Daily Bugle is now putting out there as Spidey crimes, but they don't fully believe it. Over with Black Cat, back at Alchemax, we see that they more or less want to now weaponize that actual serum that was being used on Agent Venom, which of course turned him into the Agent Anti-Venom. Boy, this is getting confusing. Anyways, back at the Bugle, Spidey breaks in. Robbie Robertson is actually able to figure out that this isn't Spider-Man. It just so happens to be a mask that's on him, and he's kind of looking at it going, yeah, this isn't really you. I can tell that you're just a bad guy, so we're gonna hold off on that. Spidey tries to really push them to publish a story about Black Cat and Felicia Hardy to draw her out, but that's when Flash Thompson actually shows up, and the two get into a giant fight in the snowy wasteland that is New York. and the fight is pretty good, and then they're actually joined by Black Cat and Venom. And all of them, once Spidey is actually able to be pulled back from that Venom symbiote, is kind of just agreeing to work with them. They're all going to start working together and try to help each other to stop Lee. And speaking of Lee, as the comic ends, we see that he's literally going to turn a giant section of the Mafia all into his own personal Venom symbiote army. So building off of what has happened in this series before, we see that things are sort of starting to build towards the ultimate climax of this crossover. We see that the symbiote heroes, consisting of Venom, who is Eddie Brock, Agent Anti-Venom Flash Thompson, Manic, and Black Cat, are all after Price, aka Maniac, and we see that Maniac himself is up to his old tricks. But this time, of course, he has Spider-Man under his control, and he's telling him what to do. Spidey is quick to tell him that he decided to leave these guys behind, and that things are going to work out since they're going to walk into a trap. Unfortunately, Spidey ends up slipping up by cracking a joke where Maniac realizes that he's not under his influence. Fortunate for Spidey, his crew that's here to defend him was right behind him, being able to track him. As they jump in, and a giant fight between all the symbiotes breaks out across this warehouse. And it's pretty great. We see a lot of great action, we see a lot of jokes being tossed back and forth, we see a lot of gunfighting. It's pretty good, honestly, from start to finish. It's very detailed, very cool looking, and we even see all the symbiotes get outsmarted. As it turns out, they're going to use the anti-venom by spreading it everywhere and then blowing up across all of the symbiote people to be able to get them to break apart from the little pieces that they have on them, and it works. Although there is one little piece that is left over that they have to worry about. And then there's a lot more pieces that all start retreating. Once they start trying to catch up to them, they realize where they're going. And where they're going is nowhere good, as Price has now called them all up upon themselves, and he's realized that he should never have spread them. Instead, he should have kept them all for himself, as he's now one giant ultimate looking Venom with guns and everything piercing out of his body. Maniac is now huge. He is a giant symbiote, and it's down to Spider-Man, Venom, Agent Anti-Venom, and Black Cat to try to come up with a plan to how to stop him. Unfortunately, as he keeps getting bigger and bigger, he's doing more and more damage. So Flash Thompson decides that the best course of action would be to use his anti-venom suit to try to jump inside and try to dismantle him from the inside. It doesn't necessarily work like that, as he gets more or less punched to what everybody thinks is death and gets a bunch of rocks thrown at his face. As Black Cat is then attacked by the symbiote that tries to once again mind control her, she realizes that the thing cannot recapture its host for a second time. So a plan starts to slowly hatch up. Andy actually shows up out of nowhere and starts throwing flames at this giant Venom creature, which is only going to make her angrier. While Flash himself seems to be very hurt, we see Spider-Man show up and he starts talking to Flash. He tells him he needs the soldier that would do anything for his troops. He really needs him right now to recover and to execute this plan, which is going to take everybody into account. So as they both get back into battle, we see that this giant Venom Maniac is, well, still going insane, trying to destroy everything, just trying to stop everybody and get a lot of revenge. Venom, Spider-Man, Black Cat, and Anti-Venom all come up with a pretty cool plan, as Flash Thompson ends up merging with some other elements and he ends up becoming extremely sharp, as he puts it. He jumps up into this giant Venom, slashing the living hell out of it, leaving Price all on the ground to be tied up while they all wait for the police to show up. Spidey even suggests that maybe some of these people like Black Cat, and specifically Venom, just wait here and maybe kind of admit to their crimes. They're not going to have any of that. When Spidey shows up back at the apartment, him and Bobby quickly talk. He ends up swinging out of the apartment when she goes into the bathroom, considering it was destroyed in the previous issues. Venom and Black Cat have a little bit of a talk between themselves. Brock tells her that maybe this town needs some heroes, and maybe that's where she goes now, that her crime syndicate days are pretty much left and buried behind her. Venom swings off, and that's the end of the comic. Honestly, I really enjoyed this one. Action-packed, yet gets to the core of the characters, kind of establishes where they're going to be going in the future, and very well handled. It's not the best, but it's very entertaining and a good ending to a in my opinion, great storyline. I would give this comic an 8 out of 10, and this entire run would get a very positive 8 out of 10.